Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to untangle the wonderfully complex web of managing AI compliance across international borders. Look, if your organization is building or deploying AI on a global scale right now, you already know it's a massive technological achievement. But let's be real, from a governance and cybersecurity standpoint, it can feel like absolute chaos. So today we're exploring how the ISO/IEC 42001-2023 standard basically acts as a universal translator. It's this overarching framework that lets multinational companies lock down their security, maintain ethical integrity, and actually stay legally compliant, literally no matter where in the world their AI systems are running.
We've got a super clear roadmap for this explainer today. We'll start with the Global AI Governance Challenge. Then we'll navigate diverse regulatory hurdles, secure those cross-border data flows, master compliance mapping, document our multinational AI strategies, and finally, synchronize global audit coordination. All right, let's jump right in.
Section 1, the Global AI Governance Challenge. So, let's zoom out a bit and look at the massive friction that gets created the second our AI operations cross a border.
Because deploying AI globally creates a chaotic collision of varying legal frameworks, cultural norms, and technical maturity. Scaling multinational AI, it's not just about pushing code. It's about navigating this crazy maze where every single jurisdiction has totally different rules for the exact same data. Think about it. AI systems are incredibly data hungry, right? They chew through massive amounts of personally identifiable information, proprietary business secrets, maybe even sensitive national security data. So the moment you deploy a model globally, bam, you trigger this chaotic collision of legal requirements, entirely different cultural attitudes toward privacy, and totally varying levels of tech maturity across your regional offices. And this matters so much because literally one misstep in a single region can compromise your entire global operation.
And here we can clearly see the core variables driving all this compliance chaos. We're talking diverse regulatory environments that, honestly, often contradict each other completely. Then you've got varying cultural attitudes on security, like some regions just want rapid innovation at all costs, while others will fiercely protect personal privacy. Throw in the headaches of shifting cross-border data flows and these highly complex decentralized organizational structures where, say, the Tokyo office runs entirely differently from the London office, and you've got a perfect storm. But this is exactly where ISO/IEC 42001-2023 comes in. It provides the standardized management system you absolutely need to bring harmony to all these moving parts.
All right, moving on to Section 2, navigating diverse regulatory hurdles. Let's see how these clashing regulations actually play out on the ground.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the stark contrast between the EU's unified GDPR and the heavily fragmented landscape over in the US. If you're running AI in the European Union, the GDPR drops some incredibly strict privacy-first requirements on you, things like data subject rights, transparency, and really severe restrictions on data transfers. But jump across the pond to the United States, and well, there's no single, comprehensive national privacy law. Instead, you're piecing together this patchwork of state-level laws like the CCPA in California. So your AI system has to be smart enough, and more importantly, your governance framework has to be robust enough to seamlessly pivot between these two entirely different legal philosophies without missing a single beat.
And you know, it goes way beyond just the letter of the law. You also have to reconcile some real cultural friction. You're balancing privacy versus innovation priorities. You've got centralized corporate controls clashing with decentralized local ways of doing things. Even something like employee security culture can vary wildly, highly regimented in one country, completely relaxed in another. Add in distinct local jurisdictional pressures, and it's a lot to handle. A lead auditor checking your ISO/IEC 42001-2023 compliance is going to make sure these regional differences aren't creating weak links in your global security chain. The standard practically demands that risks are managed consistently across the board, so your baseline security is never, ever compromised.
Which brings us to Section 3, securing cross-border data flows. Because AI needs massive amounts of data, moving it across borders is often the ultimate nightmare. Let's define exactly what we mean here. Cross-border data transfers are the movement of sensitive AI training or operational data across international jurisdictional boundaries. Basically, if you're training an AI model over in the US, but you're feeding it data from EU citizens, yep, you're executing a cross-border transfer. And that instantly triggers some massive compliance hurdles. See, AI models are almost never trained and deployed in just one isolated geographic silo. They rely on globally aggregated datasets.
But the very second a single byte of personal data crosses an international line, it gets tangled up in some seriously complex transfer rules.
As this perfectly highlights, the flow of data between jurisdictions must be managed carefully to ensure compliance with local data protection laws. Mishandling this data flow under ISO/ISOC 42001-2023 is no joke. It can lead to severe regulatory penalties from watchdogs who are eagerly enforcing these strict local laws. The standard demands really strong data protection controls to stop unauthorized access or data loss during these transfers. Because if you don't map your data flows and lock them down according to the absolute strictest applicable law, like the GDPR's adequacy requirements, for instance, you are leaving your whole organization wide open to massive liability. Getting this right is absolutely crucial for your global AI initiatives to survive. Okay, Section 4, Mastering Compliance Mapping. Let's look at the actual solution to all these local headaches.
Seriously, compliance mapping is basically your new best friend here. It lets you take the ISO/IEC 42001-2023 controls and literally map them directly to regional laws. So look at this breakdown. The ISO standard requires a risk assessment, right? Well, over in the EU, that maps perfectly to a GDPR Data Protection Impact Assessment, or DPIA. In the US, say for healthcare, it maps to HIPAA safeguards, or for consumers, a CCPA risk review. Or in Japan, it's an APPI assessment. By charting it out exactly like this, you can physically prove to an auditor that your single ISO framework is actively satisfying a dozen different regional laws all at exactly the same time.
And that brings us to the magic number 1. There should only ever be one unified global risk management strategy for your organization. But, and this is a big but, it has to be flexible enough to address highly localized threats. You definitely do not want 5 completely different cybersecurity frameworks trying to run your global business. It'd be chaos. You just want one powerful, centralized engine, ISO IOC 42001-2023, that powers all your localized compliance efforts. It simplifies your operations and massively reduces your governance overhead.
Section 5, Documenting Multinational AI Strategies. Let's see how we build this into a perfectly organized hub-and-spoke model. Because honestly, in the compliance world, if it isn't documented, an auditor is just going to assume it doesn't exist. So think of this strategy like a hub-and-spoke model. Step 1, you establish your global master policy. That's your hub. Step 2, you create region-specific appendices. Those are the spokes. And Step 3, you tailor localized audit checklists. Your master policy sets the overarching tone, your commitment to AI security, transparency, all that good stuff. But the regional appendices, they do the heavy lifting for the local laws. So the master policy might just say, we encrypt sensitive data, while the European appendix spells out exactly how that encryption satisfies GDPR, and the US appendix explains how it handles state-level laws. It's a really brilliant way to organize it.
So what this actually looks like in practice is a mix of global compliance manuals, region-specific data protection appendices, harmonized training programs, and localized risk management reports. Standardizing all of these documents guarantees that your teams, whether they're sitting in Tokyo, London, or New York, are all singing from the same harmonized compliance hymnal. Take training, for example. You might roll out a global online course covering the core ISO/IEC 42001-2023 principles for everybody. But then you follow that up with targeted workshops for your team in Germany that dig into specific EU energy sector AI regulations. It's the perfect way to keep everyone aligned without glossing over that essential local nuance.
And finally, Section 6, Synchronizing Global Audit Coordination. It is time to prove our compliance and test if this whole system actually holds up.
Because at the end of the day, a global lead auditor acts as the conductor, coordinating all those regional audits to ensure unified adherence to the ISO standard. You absolutely cannot have your regional offices going rogue when audit time rolls around. In a multinational setup, auditing can't just be this fragmented, disorganized mess. You need a centralized lead auditor to oversee the whole global assessment, making sure the core ISO standard is met everywhere, while still giving the local auditors room to check those very specific national guidelines.
And here is exactly how they pull that off. First, they define global audit objectives. Second, they adapt those criteria for regional laws. Third, they execute synchronized local audits. And fourth, they consolidate the findings globally. So, by adapting the big picture objectives to those local criteria, the lead auditor can roll all those regional findings up into one single cohesive picture of your global AI health. To put that into perspective, a global banking audit might look at FCA regulations for the UK branch, and then turn around and check FSA standards for the Japanese branch. But ultimately,
all of those localized findings feed right back into one central global management review to grade the overall health of your ISO IEC 42001-2023 system.
Which leaves us with one really big question to ponder. How will your organization's master policy adapt when the next wave of disruptive AI legislation hits? Because let's be honest, AI regulations are literally never going to stop evolving. We're already watching the EU AI Act roll out, and more regional laws are entirely 100% inevitable. The real takeaway from all of this is that compliance isn't a destination. It's a dynamic, continuous process. Your ISO/ISO 42001-2023 framework has to be ready to pivot at a moment's notice. Is your multinational strategy flexible enough to absorb the next massive regulatory shockwave without breaking your global operations? That is the question every single AI leader needs to be asking themselves right now. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.